welcome to our World Hour of Power show. Here with Lady Pauline and my co-host, Mr. Glenn Greenwich, the Honorable Mayor of Sutton Boulevard. And today we have a special guest co-host, Mr. Wayne Gilman, which is a political analyst. Welcome, everybody, to the show.
All right.
Welcome. Thank you. It's an honor and a pleasure, and I'm glad for this opportunity because it was something that I've wanted to do for quite some time, but we have a very, very special guest, someone I've known for quite some time. And it's an honor and a pleasure to introduce our audience here today. Retired. I hate that word retired, but it's former or retired New York City Chief of Police, Dr. William Bill Chapman. Welcome to the program.
Good afternoon, Wayne. How are you?
I guess all right. Right. Thank you.
Good to have you.
Glad to have you. Good to have you.
My pleasure to be here.
Yes. Well, let me see now. I was reading your bio, and I heard that you were born in Bed-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Yes, proud son of Halsey Street between Throop and Sumner Avenues.
Oh, wow. Tell me a little bit about your life and some of the highlights of it.
Well, as a native son of Brooklyn, we thought the world revolved around the Brooklyn Dodgers. And I thought everybody in Bed-Stuy and in the world was West Indian because
They were.
So it was a real sense of community. And then Walter O'Malley, the owner of the Dodgers, sold the team in 1958. And my father and grandfather, who were really diehard Dodger fans, said, time to leave Brooklyn. And we moved to St. Albans, Queens, where I spent a good part of my youth growing up, going to high school. There, went to Newtown High School, and then went off to college to be an architect. And in my third year of architecture, I was told by my design instructor that people that look like me probably would only be draftsmen. So I was barking up the wrong tree. And unfortunately, at the same time was the Chicago Democratic Convention, where the police in Chicago had a field day abusing the kids who were demonstrating in the park. And when I made remarks to that effect in front of my uncle, who's an Episcopal minister and a civil rights diehard pioneer, and my father, who was a housing police officer, they looked at me and said, you're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. And I joined the police department. And the rest is kind of history. I went to East Harlem as a young police officer, was in the neighborhood police team long before it was fashionable to do community policing, went up through the ranks and had the privilege as captain to work for the first African-American police commissioner, and probably the brightest guy to ever sit in that chair, Ben Ward. And then with what I learned from Ben Ward and from another idol of mine, David W. Scott, who was a lieutenant in the 2-3 when I was there, and then first deputy commissioner, I was lucky enough to be appointed chief of patrol, and at that time served for 3.5 years, which was a long time at that period, and went off to be the commissioner of the New York City Department of Transportation. Please don't blame me for all the bicycles in Manhattan. I didn't. After 2 years of that, I missed policing and decided that it was time. Couldn't go back to the NYPD because I had already retired from there. Was the chief in Bridgeport, Connecticut for 5 years, and was asked towards the end of that tenure by Commissioner Kelly to come back and become the deputy commissioner of training because he felt with what I knew in 30 years of policing, I could share that with the younger generation of police officers. That's the abridged version. If you want the long version, you need about a 7-hour show.
I'm not surprised. You know, one thing, I mean, I have a commonality with retired Chief of Police Chapman, that we're both from Bed-Stuy. We're both of Caribbean background. And it's just amazing of how many people, that is a show in itself, how many people have come out of that neighborhood, you know, and have gone on to different things. I'm not even going to include myself in that process. But the deal is, it just seems that the landscape for policing back in the day seemed to be a lot easier than what you see today. And when you juxtapose one with the other, what do you think are some of the problems that we're facing right now?
Well, there's a difference generationally. Our generation was taught to interact with people, This generation interacts with their phones and with their computers. So as a result, you don't have that experience in understanding how people feel and communicating with them effectively. So that leads to problems. I saw that when I was deputy commissioner training. I was watching how the young recruits were addressing each other. And I said, goodness, if this is the way they address each other, how are they going to address people when they get out in the street? So there is a problem with communication. The other issue is we came a long way for a short period of time in terms of race inclusion. And then we got into skewing the dynamic. I had never heard the term majority minority. I mean, it's like jumbo, it's an oxymoron, like jumbo shrimp. And when the police department was having trouble recruiting African Americans, Latinos, and Asians, they would group white women in as the protected class to make it look like it wasn't skewed racially in one direction or the other. That's problematic because that's disingenuous. You need to reach out to be an effective department and reflect the people who you actually serve. You cannot have a commuter police department. You cannot have a department that is tone deaf to the needs of people. And wherever you are, I had the responsibility as chief of patrol of all, at that time, 76 precincts. There are more now. But the issue was if you went from community to community, everyone wanted the same thing. They wanted the police to protect them, to be proactive, to be professional, and to be respectful. And that isn't happening across the board. And until that happens, we're going to continue to have these tragedies and acts of misconduct that really stain the reputation of the department.
Chief Chapman, does it have to do with the, you talked about communication. And so when we're looking at how the community is communicated with, is that where has the training stopped? What has been dropped out of that type of communication?
Well, there are a number of aspects here. Number one is the way you recruit. You recruit from society. So the police department is a reflection of society. Right. You have some very good people, you have some nice people, you have some marginal people, and you have some problems. Right. What the police department is suffering from now is not policing itself. So now external factors that don't have the knowledge in law enforcement are policing them. And it's painful for them because now they become a member of a persecuted minority group and can't understand why. That's one issue. The other thing was when we turned from focusing on community policing to this ComStat process, where you got 600 arrests last year, you have to do 650 this year. You gave out 700 summonses last month, you have to do more. Putting pressure on police officers to produce statistics reduces the community they serve to nothing more than statistical data. Well, your community is safer because there's 10% fewer robberies. No, every time there's a robbery, you have a victim, and the system has failed. The object and the mission of police is to protect people and prevent crime. Once you fail to do that, you've created a situation where now you have to invoke an investigation through the detective squad, or you make an arrest and you lose that police officer off patrol to court. So the idea is first and foremost to protect and prevent. That is not the fundamental theory of policing now. Everything you see is responsive. Critical response unit. Well, if there's a critical incident, we respond in great numbers. That's wonderful, but how about preventing that incident in the first place and having a relationship with people that is positive?
Let's stay right there with relationship. So, is it the fact that that the police are not coming from the communities that they're policing impact the level of communication that they have with the community?
Part of that is true. It's been my experience that just because you come from the community doesn't mean that you're going to be good for that community. There are people that look like us that are just as injurious to policing and to the people in our community than people who don't have melanin. That's the reality. What you want is someone who is professional, enough to be colorblind in delivery of police services. We talked about something in 119th Street. When I was 119th Avenue, when I was the commander of the 113th precinct, all I heard about was police officer Georgie, who kept everyone in Rochdale Village safe. And I thought this guy was obviously triplets because he was working all the time and there was no crime. He went on vacation for 2 weeks and there was a crime spree. And I put 4 officers to cover the same area that he covered, and they couldn't do the job. And when he came back, now this, as we know, this is an African American community. It was an area where I grew up. It was Jamaica racetrack when I lived there. So that's how far back I go. Officer George stuck his head in the window in the doorway while I was working, and I'm looking at him and I'm going, who is this guy? And this guy was not one of us. He was a white police officer that the community swore to. They loved him. And when I had a vacancy in community affairs, I appointed him community affairs officer. Well, you would have thought that I had brought in George Wallace because some of the black officers said, no, this is a black community. We have to have a black guy. No, you have to have a good person. Someone who feels for the community, will respect them, and deliver police services. And what that person is, you should be colorblind to. And that's the difficulty. Because if you have people in leadership who won't make those kinds of decisions, then you're going to wind up with the status quo, where the mayor comes on every day and says, oh, we have to have a better relationship with the community. Well, darn it, you're responsible for the city. You're responsible for the police department. Why don't you start by doing something? You can't blame the police, because the police respond and work for the mayor. And the mayor is responsible for the good things, if there's crime reduction, and for the bad things, when people in the police department don't live up to their obligations and to the duty they were sworn to.
You mentioned early on the whole business of home rule. I mean, how much is that a factor? If I lived in the community in which I patrolled, maybe I would have a greater understanding of some of the inhabitants and certainly the culture of the community. What's your take on that? Is that
well? I think there's definitely an advantage to that. Living. It's funny. The first precinct that I commanded was the 81st precinct in Bed-Stuy. Unfortunately, my uncle was the pastor of the Episcopal Church there, so every Sunday I had to go to church. And if I wasn't there, where's Captain Chapman? He belongs here. And then the second precinct I had was the 113 in Queens. Me coming from that community gave me tremendous insight, because neighbors, people who were friends of my parents, I could relate to, because we had a commonality. Is that an advantage? Absolutely. There is no taking away from that. But there is absolutely no reason for someone to come from the outside and not learn the mores and the ways of that community. When I was an inspector, I was transferred to Crown Heights. Okay. And the Hasidic community there obviously has different mores from the Christian community in Queens.
Sure.
I learned those mores. I was an outsider and was determined to treat everyone in that community with the respect that they deserved. That is a problem of leadership. If the leadership in the police department does not demand that of their ranking officers, then the ranking officers will not demand it for the people who are out on patrol. And those are the people that really are critical in delivering police services or making people think they shouldn't call the police.
So technically, the escalation of crime that we've been witnessing in the last year, or even before the pandemic, but it's really gotten out of hand now, is the responsibility of the mayor?
Absolutely. There is no... I've lived through and worked through, I should say, lived through, because I was here when Moses was going to high school. I have lived through 7 mayoral administrations and worked for 12 different police commissioners, 13 if you count Ray Kelly twice. And the reality is, all of the direction in terms of policing comes from City Hall. Mayor Dinkins had the great mosaic, the gorgeous mosaic. He wanted people to get along and bring people together. Mayor Giuliani was, let's go out there and lock all the criminals up. Mayor Bloomberg was sort of, let's prevent terrorism. So each one of them has a priority. And based upon that priority, you see the direction of the police department. you rely, if you're the mayor, on the police department for expertise if you're wise. Giuliani, let's not talk about Giuliani today. This is Giuliani 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Chief, I hate to say we have to pay the bills. Hold that
That's
thought.
important.
Hold that thought, and we'll be back in a minute, okay?
We'll be right back. But first, are you a small business owner looking for solutions? TMI and Partners is a business solution company offering operational, branding, and financial solution. For only $9.99 a month, your company will be assigned a personal business advisor. Well, that's right, only $9.99 per month, no contract, and you're on your way. Call TMI at 347-234-5304. That's 347-234-5304. Or visit their website at tmium.com. Tomorrow, the world will know your business. Is that it, guys? Hello? Did I do good?
My Shiro doesn't always wear a cape, but she always has time for a hug, a smile, for going the extra mile. My Shiro stretches every dollar, puts in long hours, puts others first. But now it's your time, Mom. When you're ready to retire, we want you to be able to enjoy it. It's time to start saving now. A free 3-minute online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today. Visit aceyourretirement.org.
Hi, this is attorney Stephen G. James. We've been practicing law at this law firm for over 30 years. I'm a former assistant prosecutor in Kings County and currently a defense attorney to serve you better. We work harder to serve you better. So just call us for the lawyers you can trust. 646-905-9000. 646-905-7001. We're located on Sutphin Boulevard, right near Hillside here in Jamaica, Queens, New York. For over 30 years serving the community. The law firm of Stephen G. James. Thank you.
And we're right back. And Chief Chapman, so we were talking about leadership, and you were saying that the mayor gives the flavor of the police force. Anything else you want to say about that?
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Yeah, continue. I just wanted to hear a little bit more about that. That was an interesting. You're comparing different profiles. Like Bloomberg, you said was more concerned with terrorists and like that.
Well, we can go back to Mayor Koch, because Mayor Koch used to stand on the Brooklyn Bridge and say, "How am I doing?" He was very impressed in himself, but he really didn't have much interaction with the police. We were kind of stepchildren to him. And Mayor Dinkins came in and wanted to bring the police and the community together. That's why he got Ben Ward to introduce community policing, the CPOP program, where every precinct had dedicated officers who went out on foot and worked and built bridges of communication with the community. Then after the crack epidemic hit and there was major problems with crime, Dinkins hired the 5,000 people, left office, and Giuliani was the beneficiary of 5,000 new police officers.
Yes, he was. Mm-hmm.
And went out focused, because for whatever reason, the rank and file police officers thought that Mayor Dinkins did not like police. Let me set the record straight. That was not true. Mayor Dinkins loved and respected police. His first deputy mayor, Norman Steisel, was the one who didn't like police, and a lot of his ideas came down and negatively affected policing. Mayor Dinkins, being loyal to him, took the hit for him, but it wasn't Dinkins. Okay. Giuliani came in, the police embraced him. They went out and did a fantastic job reducing crime, also got a handle on the crack epidemic. And it was Ben Ward who put together TNT after the assassination of Officer Eddie Byrne that went after narcotics. So this all started early on and developed. Giuliani then continued with this crime fighting until we had 9/11. Bloomberg comes on board. Bloomberg is very much concerned that we don't have a third attack, because we had one in 1993 that luckily didn't do the damage that the murder of 9/11 did. And Bloomberg got Ray Kelly to put together the greatest, most effective counterterrorism mechanism in the country. That was Ray Kelly's legacy, and would have been had he not had the adverse impact of stop and frisk. But that was Bloomberg's concern, that the city not be attacked again. After Bloomberg's third term, you now have a Democratic primary where you have a very bright person, Christine Quinn, who was a speaker, who should have been the mayor, or Anthony Weiner until he decided to show pictures of himself inappropriately, or Bill Thompson,
Right.
who clearly was a people person. You know, I'm biased there because his father was my uncle's law partner. Yeah, and and those three, for whatever reason, had ineffective campaigns, and we got the fourth choice. The man who ran on an anti-police campaign, stop and frisk is bad. Stop and frisk is the law. Stop, question, and frisk is Terry versus Ohio, it's the law. Was it misimplemented? Absolutely. And that was a tactical mistake on the part of the police. The same way not weeding out inappropriate people in anti-crime led to the removal of the anti-crime scene unit from communities, which was a big problem. And before that, the street crime unit, which was effective. If you use policing effectively towards criminality, then you will get a great community response. If you use policing repressively, then you get the reaction that you're getting today.
So let me stop you there because you're making a great point, and I really want our listeners to understand it. So what you're saying in the CPOP program, the fact that you're you talk about it in the police work as a marriage of the two C's, cops and community.
Community,
so,
yes.
So expound about that a little bit more. Why was that so effective then? And why has it been why did it drop off now?
Because the focus changed. It depends on the philosophy coming out of City Hall, being interpreted by the police commissioner. Ben Ward believed that the best way to serve a community was to prevent crime and make police an integral part of it. The same way you knew who your grocer was or your pharmacist was, he wanted the police to be part of that, so that when there was an issue, you could reach out and it wasn't like, let me call the police and worry about who I'm going to get. No, I'm going to get Officer Jones, who I know. Or I see, I see Officer Felicia walking up and down the street every day on the post, so I'm comfortable. Or another officer who's at the school crossing when my kid gets out of school, so that the kids in the community see police officers as a positive institution, and the adults in the community see the police officers as someone who respects them and is there to protect them. That was a program that was established in every precinct, and it was as successful as the quality of the officers who were assigned to it. I don't believe that you can have part of your department doing that kind of relationship and not have the entire department do it. Everyone who is on patrol, in the bad old days, when we had old radio cars with a little bubblegum thing on the top and no air conditioning and no power controls, and the radio inside was about 160 degrees in the summer.
You're dating yourself.
The windows were rolled down, and as you roll slowly, because the car never went more than about 5 miles an hour, you got to see the people who were in the community. You could hear them. You got a feel for them. And as a result, you became closer. When I first got in the radio car after being in the 2-3 for about a year, the guy I rode with was a senior officer. And when he went down the street, he waved to the barber. He stopped and talked to the people who sold the newspapers. The people in the grocery store waved to him. The guy in the liquor store said, look, I'm closing up tonight. Would you watch? Would you be careful? Because I'm going to carry a lot of money on it. There was a relationship between the people who were in the police cars, the people who were on the foot posts, and the community. We've lost that. The poor people in the radio cars, who are the backbone of the job, run from radio run to radio run. They don't have 5 minutes to sit down and say, hey, Wayne's got a store in the corner. Let me say hello to Wayne, see if he's got any problems. They can't do that because they're not allowed that because they're run by the clock. That's the 9/11 system. They've got to give back the job in a hurry.
Is that the clock and the numbers that they're chasing rather than the relationships? Is that what you're
The
saying?
relationships died in 1994 completely with Comstat, and they were on life support once 9/11 started because radio car people who were out there around the clock can't get enough downtime just to do patrol. And that's where policing is important. If you can do visible patrol, you will be a deterrent to crime, you will make your neighborhood safer, and you will gain a relationship with folks because they'll see you all the time. If you're on radio run after radio run, you don't have time to do patrol, and people don't have time to see you and get to know you. So it's really important. I say over and over again, the cops are the dentists of society. They don't really want us to visit, but when the pain comes, people want us to make it disappear very quickly. That's really not the proactive way to go. The proactive way to go is to get enough officers out on the street, interacting with people, so they can tell the difference between who the law-abiding citizens are and those who are preying on the law-abiding citizens involved in gangs and other illegal activity, and focus your attention on them, because it's only 5% at max of the entire population. 95% of the population in New York City are people like us who work hard, want to be safe, and want to know if we need assistance or if we have a problem, we can call to the police, and the police will be our ally.
So if we had police walking the beats like they did back 20 years ago, that would fortify relationships and would make at least policing more effective in terms of knowing the community and interacting with the community.
Yes, theoretically, yes, but you don't have everyone with the skill to communicate. Now
Gotcha.
we have to get into people communicating. There used to be a time on the trains when between 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., the transit police had a task force, and they rode the trains to make sure the trains were safe. It doesn't do a person on the train being attacked any good if there's a police officer who's at the station. They're there after the fact. So you have to deploy. You also have to make sure you have the right people out there. Every good police officer knows in every department across the country who the knuckleheads are and who the people who don't belong in policing are. Because there are people that don't belong. And it's not just at the lower level. If you were a bad person as a police officer and you rise to the level of chief, you're going to be a bad chief. And it means you're going to affect that many more people. There are folks in that profession that just don't belong. And we go back to the mayor. There aren't policies in effect to make sure they don't get in, one. And two, once they're in, you can't train them to be decent people, but you have to discipline them and supervise them so they don't have an adverse impact on the community or the department. And that's that a lot of people will not make.
I'm glad you raised that, Bill, because that brings us to the question of qualified immunity. What's your take on that? I mean, someone who's been in the department for so many years, it just seems to be a new phenomenon now that it's been kicked around since George Floyd. What's your take on it?
Again, it goes back to the real problem with policing. Police, for years, did not police themselves. Instead of removing those who don't belong and commit those acts that are injurious to the department and to the public, they've dragged their feet. The one police commissioner has the ignominious distinction of having 2 officers use illegal chokeholds on his watch, and he didn't discipline either one of them. Other people had to come in and do it. That's part of the problem. You send a message that, hey, if I can do this, and I'm going to be protected, one, by the by the hierarchy structure, the supervisory structure, and I've got qualified immunity, hey, I'm home free. That's a real problem, and every good police supervisor and executive has to look in the mirror and say, I have to have the intestinal fortitude to know that I have a loose cannon working for me, or someone who's dangerous, or someone who's an outright bigot and doesn't like the people that he's being paid by to protect, and do something about it. There was a time when they developed a concept called termination probation, where someone had created committed an act that was so problematic that they should be fired, but for whatever technicality through department regulations and union rules, they couldn't be fired. So they put them on termination probation, and basically they said, if you do something wrong or you blow your nose the wrong way for the next year, you're going to get fired. Well, that wasn't taken strictly. And as a result, you had people who were committing these acts, small percentage, but still committing the acts 2 and 3 times, and they would get termination probation 3 or 4 times. That's like telling a robber, hey, you know what? You robbed the bank this time, don't do it again. Robs it a second time. You know what? Don't do it a third time. It has no meaning. And, and now you have people saying, okay, police shouldn't have qualified immunity. And the union responds by saying, hey, wait a minute, we can't do our jobs. No, you can't do your jobs if you don't have qualified immunity. But there is a reason why there are people challenging qualified immunity. And that's because
Chief, hold that thought.
We're going for more.
Hold that thought, Chief. We got to go to another commercial break, and we'll be back. Hold that thought.
Every day,
millions of people are connecting. Father,
cosplayer,
mentor,
actor. It's time we take a step forward, come together,
and discover
how accepting our differences can make us stronger.
As a young girl, I just grew to love using power tools, pouring concrete, and doing things that were scary and loud, and yet I looked around and realized no other girls are doing these things. As I grew up, I realized that girls need to see themselves in this space. Start here. So that's what I set out to do, and I became an educator and a mentor for young girls. No masks down till clear. Making teaches girls how to think of their ideas as important. Go light. It changes the way they think about what they're capable of. If I can fuse metal, what can't I do? Perfect. Look at how good that was. And so I think Making for Girls is about voice, and that's what's really exciting, because we're building the world we want to see for ourselves. Now I want to hear why you make.
Share your own Why I Make story today. Visit whyimake.org.
Part-time job, full-time hustle, all-time Shiro to all of us. You nurture, we listen. You teach, we thrive. You lift our spirits, but we've got to lay down the truth. It's time for you, our Shiro, to stretch for the stars. A free online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today. Start saving more for retirement so you can feel prepared and live your life to the fullest. Visit aceyourretirement.org.
You're home before sunrise, on top of the house, the kids, and our future. The smell of your cooking is our alarm clock. My Shiro's day is never done. So let's start saving a little more now so we can feel prepared for retirement. A free 3-minute online chat can give us the personalized tips we need so we can live our lives to the fullest. Visit aceyourretirement.org.
Well, we're back here with Chief Chapman, continuing this wonderful conversation of enlightenment.
Chief, the current police officers are complaining that the diaphragm ruling and no bail and no chokeholds are limiting their ability to do police work, and so they're not doing it. What's your take on all that?
I have some issues with that. When I got out of the police academy, I had a 6-shooter, no bulletproof vest, a nightstick, and a brain. And we were told to use those things. We went through a period where police officers were being assassinated merely for being police officers. Piagentini and Jones, Foster and Laurie, I could go on and on and on. They were being assassinated just because they were police officers. That is not the case now. They have 9mm guns. They have mace. There are all kinds of alternatives. And I don't understand why we have to get into a situation where it's, hi, I'm police officer Chapman, and now I shoot you. There is a whole escalating chain of things you can do. And again, this comes down to communication. There has to be, let me back up a bit. Being a police officer is not civil right, okay? It is an honor and a privilege. And if you don't feel you can do the job appropriately, then maybe you should find another profession. That's one. Number two, if there are restrictions on what you can do, then the police department is of the obligation to train their officers in alternative ways of dealing with individuals who are either in trauma or who are breaking the law and have to be subdued. It can't be, I got to choke you, or I can't do my job. I got to put my knee on your neck, I can't do my job. Because if you've subdued somebody to the point where you have to put your knee on your neck, they're already subdued. That becomes a violation. That becomes problematic. My suggestion to all of those folks is look in the mirror and say, is policing really for you? If it's not, then if you can't handle the rules and regulations that are put in place to protect citizens as well as officers, then maybe it's time you go someplace else.
Chief, I want to ask you something, because this I've noticed is the mentality and the thinking of the police officers that has changed. It's, their cruelty and the fact that they don't listen. They only hear what they want to hear or see what they want to see. When did that change? Because I see it as a real problem with the thinking.
That's been a gradual evolution. There was a piece just done about broken windows, which was the basis for CompStat, which was supposed to be the world's greatest way of doing policing. And all it did was put pressure on police officers to produce numbers and to reduce the people that they serve to nothing more than statistics. The reality is we have a generation that isn't as good with the social graces as we were or are. And I used to listen to the kids in the academy, how they addressed each other. And I was like, oh goodness, if this is the way they talk to each other here, imagine how they talk to people in the street. You can only allow police to go but so far. If they are disrespectful, if they are rude, it's a supervisory problem. And the supervisors either have to get them to a point where they can talk to people appropriately, or maybe they shouldn't be there. Again, policing isn't for everyone. I've been stopped frequently by state police in various states. I guess it must be my good looks, because it can't be. I have never come across one who wasn't in complete uniform and didn't address me as sir and didn't talk to me like I was another human being. If the NYPD is to be the finest department in the world, as it would like to think it is, then it is incumbent upon those in positions of power, from the police commissioner on down to the sergeants, to get the police officers to talk to people appropriately. If they can't, then they shouldn't be there. I would never allow anyone who was in my command, somebody did something once when I was the CO of the 8-1, a guy was in anti-crime, his father was a captain, and he brought someone who looked like us in the station house. And when the guy didn't respond appropriately, he said the magic word. And for about 30 seconds, I forgot that I was the commanding officer. He wanted to talk about the marital status of his mother and father, whether they were sister and brother or not. And I checked myself. And the next day, he was removed from anti-crime, and he was put on a foot post and told he's not going to get back in any position of discretion with that kind of attitude. And I asked the sergeant who heard it, what are you going to do about it? And the sergeant quickly thought, hey, wait a minute. CO's black. Maybe I should do something. That's not the way it should be done. He should have done something because this officer did the wrong thing. It's really important upon those people who have the brand new training facility in Queens to come up with a way to figure out how they can get police officers to talk to some folks respectively. If respectfully. If they can't, then maybe they shouldn't be in training. It should be demanded of the supervisors in the field that you talk to everybody the way you would want to talk to members of your family. And I doubt very few of them would be disrespectful or vile or in any way demeaning. The attitude now, I think, is police officers are defensive. They feel themselves alienated from the mayor, even during the layoffs in the 70s when ABEAM laid off 5,300 police officers. Police officers never turned their back on a mayor in a public gathering. They did so on a number of occasions to this mayor. So they're angry. But that anger should not be manifested towards the public, because it's the public that makes it possible for the police to function. They are there as a service provider the same way every other agency in the city is a service provider to the public. So the attitude has to change. And the attitude may change with this mayoral election, or we may have a third term of what we have now, of the current philosophy. But the bottom line is police cannot continue to disrespect people, because every time they do, someone mentions it to an elected official and they come up with a brain scheme. Let's figure out another way. Let's defund the police. Let's take these resources away from them. Let's figure out a way to make them vulnerable. So police have to police themselves. Otherwise, they're going to have a problem. And there's absolutely no excuse for being rude. None.
Bill, I just wanted to quickly ask you, as you mentioned the mayoral candidates, I know you had an announcement to make with respect to. Is it too late, or should we wait a little longer? Or
based upon some occurrences last week, actually even last week, the last several days, I'd like to hold that back a little bit because something happened that I thought really was inappropriate. I've been in policing most of my adult life. If I said to any elected official, do you know what a PD 113-152 is? I know none of the three of them.
No.
Okay?
No.
Okay. Are you aware of what a UF-28 is? I mean, if you want to go after someone on substantive issues and ask them what they're going to do about the gunfire that goes off, the two people that got shot last night, the multiple people who were being attacked by gangs, that's fine. But let's not play this game. Let me confess, I have great contempt for politicians because I think they pander. They tell us what they want to hear until they get elected. Then they forget about us for 4 years, and then they come back and say, hey, I'm here for you. I'm going to do things. Ask the people in NYPD what happens to them, how many of their elected officials they see. This set of candidates has not put forth a platform to say, why is it that homeless people prefer the subway tunnels to homeless shelters? And why have they preferred that for the last 15, 20 years? Why is it that schools in neighborhoods of color, if they're not charter schools, get less equipment and less resources than those in more affluent communities? Why is it that police officers who constantly are discipline problems aren't fired? Come up with something that's substantial, and then I can make an endorsement. Right now, I'm very disappointed. You know, my choice is none of the above yet. But being the eternal optimist, I am hoping that someone will come up and say, hey, wait a minute. You know, I realize what's wrong now. And this is not, I have a plan and it's locked in a box somewhere. And after you elect me, I'll bring it out. This is what the plan is. This is what I'm going to do. You can't defund the police. You can reallocate the funding so they don't buy a mechanical dog and spend
I saw that, yeah.
You know,
I know, I didn't see that. What's that about?
spend a whole lot of money, or must have a cousin Vinny in the mechanical dog business, because there was a mechanical dog they
I
sent
saw
out.
that.
I thought it was going to be a bomb retrieving dog or something.
Yeah,
And
that's what I thought.
you see at a craft fair. That's ridiculous. But it's not just to this generation. When there was a point where there was no toilet paper in precincts, two chiefs in headquarters were paneling their offices with wood. Okay? So to me, there has to be a check and balance. There has to be accountability. There has to be a concern. Maybe us old guys are a dying breed, but we came into policing to make a difference, to make communities better, to make people feel safer, to understand that everybody, no matter what color or religion you were, wanted to be safe in their home and their places of worship. Now, that doesn't happen. Why? Because the people who run for office say all kinds of things because they think it will be accepted by a group of people. Oh, great, I'll defund the police. So now 6,000 people will vote for me. But people in other communities are saying, what, are you crazy? You're going to defund the police? How can you do that? We need the police. They're not going to go away. Well, we'll change things. We used to have service providers respond to mental health situations in police cars or at the same time as the police. Sometimes that worked and sometimes it didn't. There was a doctor in Kings County Hospital that will tell you if it wasn't for two officers who responded, Goldman and Petrillo, he would have been stabbed by a guy who didn't take his meds. And the two officers saved his life. But there are folks who don't want police officers to respond. We don't want cops in the schools. Cops are not in the schools. School safety officers are there, and we took over the school safety officer program because the Board of Education couldn't train them, couldn't supervise them, and couldn't deploy them properly. But let's send them back. This is all part of the problem of a group of candidates. Hey, why don't they sit down with experts in the field, learn something, and then come back and say, this is what I'm going to do with this knowledge for the benefit of the electorate?
Well, one of the candidates is a former colleague of yours. I spoke too soon.
I was going to bring that up, but go ahead.
I was going to be nice and let that go. All right? Okay. However, first of all, that candidate started out as a transit police officer many years. He didn't come to the NYPD until after the merger. All of those years in transit, and he hasn't made a single recommendation as how to make this transit system safer. Okay? 1. 2, he was a captain in the NYPD. That means something to all of you who are not members of the NYPD.
Right.
But to us on the inside, he wasn't a precinct commander. He was not selected to be a precinct commander because of they didn't feel that he had the appropriate temperament or skill set to be a precinct commander. He spent every Sunday having a press conference and really knocking the police commissioner at the time, Howard Safer, who had done more for diversity than his predecessor, Bill Bratton, and the guy who followed him, Bernie Kerik. So as far as I'm concerned, that's great. But when your borough is blowing up with more gunfire than probably any place else in the city, hey, Captain, don't do an advertisement. Get out there in the street and show people that you're taking your knowledge of policing and use it for the betterment of the community, not for the betterment of your own political ambition. Right?
Well,
okay.
Why don't you tell us how you really think?
That's the problem. I expected more from him.
Yeah.
I really expected more, and I'm disappointed. You know, for some of the other people, some of the other candidates, I was a sanitation commissioner. Yeah, but garbage was piling up in the street before the pandemic. And there was a whole winter, cars couldn't move because you didn't get the streets plowed.
Right.
We have another candidate that was in CCRB for a year, but wants to destroy the police department. Well, if you really wanted to leverage the police department, you should have stayed where you were and proved that you can do it. There are other folks who are just non-starters. When Giuliani was running for president, his sentences were a noun, a verb, and 9/11. This guy, Sean Donovan, I work for Obama. Right. Wonderful. President Obama was fantastic. This guy, I've never heard of. And if he was so good in housing, how come NYCHA is in the state of disrepair that it is? What about all those people who live there? We have an obligation to them to allow them to live in some kind of sense of we're maintaining the property, we're looking for the best for them. That's not happening, So it's not. I don't want you to think I'm dumping on one person, but the reality is, you got to show a lot if you want to be the mayor of the biggest city in the world. And if you can't, it's not. This is not an upward mobility thing. If you want to take the person who's got the most experience, you look at the guy who's the controller, but he can't go anywhere because he's got a sexual harassment complaint. But we elected a guy who was president, who had a whole bunch of them.
I was just going to say.
Investigate for him. So far today, it's none of the above. And the one guy I'm looking at still who has been underpublicized is the African-American gentleman who rose in the ranks of Citibank. Because if you can be of color and get to the top of Citibank when they won't give black folks mortgages, then maybe you're okay. You just have to look and see, because he has been underpublicized. You heard a little bit from Spike Lee, you heard a little bit from Greg Meeks. I want to hear what he has to say, and I want to hear what everyone has to say before they come out and throw rocks at each other, because that doesn't solve anything. Saying someone doesn't know what a police form is, well, that was a dumb move on his part. He shouldn't have been out there with a police lieutenant who wasn't endorsing him and wasn't there to be his resource.
Let me ask you this. So, looking at the overall picture, we've got a lot of issues here in New York City, and when we look, we look to the policing as probably one of the biggest areas of improvement that we'd like to have. What would you say are the top 3 or 4 items that would make the most difference in getting crime under, back in control, the homelessness, and some of the other major issues that end up falling under policing, but are not necessarily a police issue?
Well, there are 3 key ones. You can't go anywhere in this city without public safety. That was one of the things that Giuliani focused on when he first came in, and it made a lot of sense, because once people feel safe, they will move about without problem. So whoever becomes the mayor has to get the police to buy in. He's got to get them out of the reactive mode into the prevention mode, and get as many people out in the precincts, in the transit districts, and the housing PSAs as possible. The specialty squads and all these other ancillary units should come secondary if the patrol function is working appropriately, and that will be to lessen crime. If you lessen the incidence of crime, then the detectives and the squads can focus on those crimes that they eventually get and have a higher clearance rate. But the police are the back end of the system. What you have to do up front is educate kids. Give kids a decent education and make sure that that no kid is left behind. If they need tutoring, give them tutoring. If they're in a school that lacks resources, get the resources to them. And I'm not just talking about charter schools. The Board of Education has an obligation to educate the children, not to call themselves educators and have kids that in the 7th grade that can't read and can't add. They have to concentrate on getting kids educated and in a place where they can make a positive role in society. All our religious institutions need to come out and have youth programs for the kids, so they're not left with, I join a gang or I hide in the house, because that's important. We have to have role models. And the other thing is we have to stop shooting each other. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. I don't want to put the doctors in the emergency rooms out of business, but
all the funeral homes.
Yeah, that's true. I don't understand why we have to have and tolerate this violence in our community. Ben Ward used to call it our dirty little secret. And the reality is, if you don't want the cops in your community because they don't treat you right or they don't be respectful, don't shoot each other. And then they're not going to come. Right. That's important. And there is absolutely no reason, I don't want to say we're old, Wayne, But when we got into disputes in our time, somebody wound up with a bloody nose,
Right.
or
The black eye or whatever.
A knife,
Yeah.
maybe.
yeah, and then 2 weeks later we went out for a drink and it was fine. Right? Now it's you looked at me funny. I'm going to go back and get an Uzi and come back and kill your whole family. That can't be, and that's the plague that we have to stop as citizens. And everybody in our community has to take responsibility for it. If we can educate folks, then they will get the advantages of other people in society, and they will be able to compete for jobs and go to college and not be involved, be out in the street and have to have a hustle because there's nothing else for them to do. If the police can be respectful and protective, then we don't have to fear the police. There's one more resource in the community. And lastly, homeless people don't vote. Homeless people don't contribute to political campaigns. So you know what? The politicians pass the buck. This has been going on. They've been hiding in just imagine us. Why would you want to be in a subway tunnel or ride the train rather than go to a shelter? Are the shelters that unsafe? And wasn't the shelter system designed to have people go to affordable housing afterwards?
Exactly.
That whole thing has to be put together, and it has to be put together right. No more social service people wringing their hands and saying, oh, my caseworkers have too many cases. Hire more caseworkers, and don't blame the police for it. Get people who need counseling into counseling. Those who need additional help should get it. And that's a responsibility. Then you won't need the police. That's a responsibility of City Hall and a failure, not just of this administration. It goes back since all of the mental institutions were dumped 30 years ago. Now, I wonder who was the governor then.
Right.
Mario Cuomo.
I've heard of him. Yeah. Didn't his son get in trouble for harassing the staff?
Yeah, that's what we hear.
So we're here.
And his brother.
There's always a little truth in a story, you know.
Well, I don't know. If I had said, just because I make you uncomfortable, that doesn't constitute harassment. I wonder how long I would have been around.
Right.
Yeah.
There's privilege for some folks, but there's got to be a responsibility. There's got to be a responsibility on the part of those who want to run for office to say, I am here for the purpose of serving those who need. And even though the homeless don't vote and they don't contribute to campaigns, they have a right to live in dignity. And a lot of them are troubled people who should be helped. Not, we counted 3,200 of them, so we're down 10% from last year. Wonderful. There's still 3,200 people that don't have homes.
Exactly.
That's great. Wayne shot me 4 times, but he had 7 rounds in the gun, so I should be 40.
Right.
Scary.
Well, I really love this conversation today, Chief Chapman. You've given us some insight around policing. You've given us some insight around what would have this city be safe. You've actually also tied together the conversation of leadership inside this the city and what the mayor's responsibility is inside of giving direction to the police force and all of the other agencies inside. And it's refreshing to hear somebody that can actually address leadership and who should be leading and who's setting the direction. And you've really made that pretty clear to us today. So
yes.
I just really want to thank you for the knowledge that you bestowed to us and to our listeners.
Yes, Chief. It's been a pleasure. We're running out of time, but I would like to say thank you so much for being on Our World, Our Power show. And for our listeners, please do not forget, you can hear us on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and our YouTube channel, Instagram, and also our Roku channel. So please don't forget to check out Our World, Our Power every Saturday from 4 to 5. And don't forget Facebook. That's our best friend right now. I'd like to say thank you to our co-host, host today, Mr. Glenn Greenwich, from always being the Honorable Mayor of Southern Boulevard, and Mr. Wayne Gilman, our political correspondent. Thank you all.
Thank you. And thank you, Bill. I really appreciate your presence here today.
Well, thank you all. I love the work that you're doing. Wayne, you know I would walk through fire for you, so that's automatic.
You may have to.
You have been an icon in this industry for years. And
Thank you.
You're not praised enough.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I also like to take the time to let our audience know that Mr. Wayne Gilman will be having his show weekly on our World Media Network starting for June. I believe he's going to start June 5th. Yeah, and I guess it's the Wayne Gilman Hour. I don't know what
We'll come up with something.
You'll come up with something.
As long as my sister's not involved, that's all I care about.
Okay, everybody, have a pleasant day, a wonderful weekend, and you've been listening to Our World, Our Power, where your news reflects you and your community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.